Good day and welcome to episode 8 of the Man and Music Show with me, Toby Allen, the podcast where we talk to MENA musicians and music industry leaders to find out real-life strategies to solve real-time issues within today's music landscape. For this episode, I got to get down and dirty and talk about the very ambiguous topic of music publishing rights within the MENA region with none other than CEO of Pop Arabia, Spec. I think you'll find this podcast very interesting, so let's jump right into it. Welcome to another episode of the Man Music Show. Awesome to have someone I've been looking to get on the show for a while. Spec, how are you?
Good, man. How's it going?
Awesome. So just to get started, could you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit more about how you got into the music industry on the earlier years. Thank you.
Sure. My name's Spec. I started my career in Canada. I started initially, I was a songwriter and artist. In my teens, I was a member of a hip-hop group called the Dream Warriors in Canada, which in hindsight now is sort of like, one of the pioneering first hip-hop exports out of Canada in the early 90s. I joined them when I was 17, and, we had a lot of success in the UK and Europe and Canada, and were sort of influences on groups like Arrested Development and Digable Planets, among others, So sort of early jazz hip-hop around the same time as groups like Gang Starr and Tribe Called Quest were sort of doing that. I really did that as an artist for most of my life, from about the age of 17 to 30. I did a few albums with the Dream Warriors, then I went solo. I moved to the UK. While I was in the UK, I worked with an artist named Nitin Sawhney, who was sort of now considered one of the sort of godfathers of, I suppose, the Asian underground movement of the UK in the late 90s. And I put out solo music as well. And at some point, somebody offered me a job in music publishing, and I took it. And that sort of led me to Dubai, where I sort of came to the Middle East, and I started asking myself how the music publishing industry was being run in the Middle East. And I found that there was an opportunity to set up the first publisher, so that's what I did. I moved out here at the end of 2006. In 2015, I moved to New York, where I was hired as the Senior VP of Creative and A&R at Reservoir, a New York-based music publisher. And last year, about a year ago in 2019, I moved back to the Middle East to focus on growing my business out here, which is called Pop Arabia. And Reservoir are now partnered with Pop Arabia. So, I'm wearing two hats in this new role.
That's awesome. So to a little bit elaborate, which is your to shine and to show light on Pop Arabia. What is Pop Arabia in the Middle East?
Pop Arabia is really the leading music publisher in the Middle East and North Africa. We launched Pop Arabia in 2011 in partnership with 2454, the Abu Dhabi Media Zone. Our business model has sort of evolved and changed over the years, but we were really initially set up to be a sub-publisher for the big global publishing giants in the MENA territories. So a sub-publisher just basically means acting as a local office for a music publisher that doesn't have a presence in a particular territory. So what we would do is we would sign agreements with global music publishing companies to represent their rights in the MENA territories, and then we would license their music in whichever way it can be licensed in this market. Our primary source of revenue was always licensing into commercials and film and TV shows and that sort of thing. And because we were representing the big, giant catalogs, that meant that if somebody was using a famous pop song, they would invariably come to us to clear the use of that song in their production. And that was really what we did, as a sub-publisher, i.e. an agent or a local office for the global catalogs. Since moving back about a year ago, we're now signing and developing our own local talent as well. And so we're signing and developing regional Arab talent in this part of the world, as well as expanding the offering of things that Pop Arabia does, be it supporting, providing label services to independent labels that want to work their repertoire in this market, among other things.
Awesome. Okay, so it's such a rabbit warren and can be perceived as quite complicated, but in layman's terms, could you break down the difference of performance, mechanical, and neighbouring rights to educate artists that might not know that they have rights?
Sure. So, you have to sort of think about it in the context of, in music, in a song, there's typically two copyrights. And so there's the copyright in the sound recording, and then there's the copyright in the composition. The copyright in the composition is, in effect, the intellectual property, the music, the melody, or the lyrics. So if somebody were to use any element of the composition, they need a license for that. That's a different thing than the copyright in the sound recording. So somebody could, in theory, use the melody of a song without actually using the original sound recording. So if somebody whistled the melody to a famous song, or if somebody used the lyrics of a song on a t-shirt, that's not using the actual sound recording, it's just using elements of the composition. So you've got, on one hand, the composition right, which is what we refer to as the music publishing right, and then the sound recording right, which is sometimes called the master recording rights or the master rights. So the neighboring right refers to the master rights. It is in effect, the neighboring right is, so if we just park that for a second, what copyright law says is anytime you use a copyright, there are multiple economic rights attached to that copyright. And so, the word copyright basically means the right to copy. The only person who's allowed to copy something is the person who created it, right? And anybody else has to get the rights to copy something from the creator. Now, the multiple economic rights that we're talking about under law, even under UAE law, are defined as typically the right to perform it or communicate it or broadcast it or reproduce it or adapt it. If you use any of, to perform the performance right is really the right to play something in public. The reproduction right is copying something in a physical way. So if I took a CD and I made 10 copies of that CD, then there's 10 copies that have been made. There are 10 reproductions that have been made. So that requires, that's a separate economic right. And then the adaptation right, or what we sometimes call the sync right, which is, sync rights are not often clearly defined in law, but they're generally the idea that somebody's adapting a copyright from an audio format to maybe a visual format. So if I'm taking a piece of music and I'm adapting it to a new technology, syncing it to a moving picture, then that requires a separate license. So you've got your three categories: performance, reproduction, which we tend to call mechanical, and then sync rights. The neighboring right is the performance of the sound recording. So if you are going to play a sound recording in public, the performance or the broadcasting of the song in public needs to be licensed, and that's typically referred to as the neighboring right. That's on the master side. On the composition side, or the music publishing side, you've got also the performance, which is really just called the performance. You've got the mechanical, which is a reproduction, such as making 10 copies of a CD off of one original recording. Or, as I said earlier, you've got the sync right, or the adaptation right, as it might be sort of defined under law.
Can get complicated at times, can't it?
Yeah, it's a bit of a head, confuser for sure,
Okay, so my next question is then, for someone listening in and they've made made some music, what's the landscape of the performing rights organization within the MENA region? And is there anything that they can do to register their works, being in the Middle East and knowing the context that there is a lack of PROs? Yeah, so there are a few societies in the broader region. Most of them are in North Africa. And then, of course, there is an agency of SACEM, the French Society in Lebanon. There are no collecting societies in the Gulf at present. In effect, what you want to do is so if we're talking about, let's talk about, say, the MENA region, right? There are a lot of challenges to collecting on royalties in the MENA region at large, because, it's one thing to register yourself with a rights organization, but it's another thing to ask whether the rights organization in whichever MENA territory you're talking about is actually able to collect money as well as data, because it's not just about collecting money, because you might hear that rights organizations are collecting money in markets like Egypt or Algeria or Morocco, but then are they also collecting data? Because if they're collecting money from a radio station, but the radio station is not providing them a list of the music that they're actually playing, then you're still not going to get paid. And so there are all kinds of challenges in ensuring that the rights holders are paid appropriately. In more developed markets, this is a little bit easier because they're able to collect, but they're also able to provide data and then distribute on the basis of the data that they're receiving. In my experience, the data is a key issue in the Middle East that has made it difficult for Middle East rights holders to fully flourish as an industry. But I suppose the good news is that there are people working on this problem and seeking to sort of resolve it and fix it. In the Gulf, of course, there's no rights organizations. And I think the bigger question is, where is your music getting played? If it's getting played in the UK or Europe or the States or Japan or Australia, then what you should be doing is you should become a member of one of the established rights organizations. Otherwise, you won't collect, even if you are getting played. If you become a member of one of the major rights organizations, then in theory, all of these rights organizations tend to work with each other, and there's about over 200 of them around the world. And so as and when royalties become collected in the Middle East, that should trickle back to you, provided
the data is connected to the money. And so my advice would be anybody who is a songwriter whose songs are being played anywhere, they should become a member of a rights organization that's well established around the world. The wider issue of resolving licensing in the Gulf is something that, you know, we've been working on a fair bit, and we're certainly have our, you know, sort of head in the sand, trying to figure out a solution, and we've been working on that, and hope to sort of be in a position to announce some steps in resolving the conundrum in the near future.
I wanted to tackle a question that came up a lot, especially in these times of COVID, that online streaming and the issues, and I'm not here to nitpick, I just wanted to get your view on it. With obviously DJing and performance of DJing sets, and then obviously the copyright of music, moving over to one, having one platform that's suddenly putting bans on, on copyright and your notices, and then obviously people moving over to another, and then because they had a less copyright, less rigor on their copyrights, and then that got found out. Who's, in your opinion, at the end of the day, DJ sets and music, it's this performance, and the people that make those records, it's the old thing, you know, DJs pretty much in this, in the world, you play people's music.
Yeah.
Someone's not getting their publishing from the performance on that. Could you just give a little bit of outline about the online publishing and where maybe those issues have come up, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, there's a lot of talk about live streaming, you know, in the sort of COVID era. The culture sort of moved very quickly into a place where DJs started live streaming a lot, you know, and that ended up becoming a really cool thing. And then they had the versus battles and all of that sort of stuff. And so there was a lot of music live streaming, but there hadn't sort of the culture moved there before the technology did. And so if you ask Facebook or Instagram, what was sort of live streaming or Instagram Live and that sort of thing, you know, there was obviously a huge uptick in the amount of people live streaming after COVID. And I don't think that they fully anticipated how much would sort of move that quickly into those verticals within the platform. And so, in short, you know, if you were to upload, if today we had a, you know, Michael Jackson song playing in the background of this interview, if you uploaded this to YouTube, YouTube has invested in technology that that has what we call audio fingerprinting software. You know, it has an ability, it has a central repository that has every song that's ever been released for the most part, and then it has the information of whose rights that corresponds to, both on the publishing side and on the master recording side. And part of that has been a multi-year process of contacting rights holders, getting rights holders to provide them with metadata and audio waveforms so that they can sort of match a musical waveform to a set of rights holders. That again, this is a process that's been going on since, you know, 2008 or 9 or so, you know, and so so they've had a good number of years to create a massive database and be able to match music to who owns it. But matching music to who owns it is a fairly complicated beast, right? Like it's every song will typically have more than one publisher. And then there's a sound recording right. And then sometimes there's even the sound recording right is split between more than one owner, you know? So it's complicated. And YouTube has sort of done this thing where, yeah, if we uploaded this video and we had a Michael Jackson song playing in the background, YouTube, within a couple of minutes, would be able to identify that it's Michael Jackson, that has been written by Michael and Quincy Jones, and who their publishers are. And everybody would automatically get a notification and would be able to opt in to monetize this video as part of their monetization tools, right? And then they can decide whether they want to block this video or whether they want to monetize some advertising around it, and there's now a business model around it for them, right? Facebook and Instagram Live, which have become I'd say the primary tools for live streaming these days, or at the moment, they do not yet have that sort of system. And live streaming just as a technology is a little bit different than recording a video and uploading it. It's happening in real time, you know, and there's a lot of technology going into streaming live, you know. And so my personal view, although I'm a complete, I'm not, a coder, so I'm in no place to say this, but my sense would be there's no reason why the technology doesn't exist for us to be able to match rights holders to music, even on a live stream, so that creators can get paid. But for whatever reason, the technology doesn't seem to have been invented yet or normalized yet. And so as a result, certainly Facebook doesn't yet have the sort of matching information and data that YouTube has built over a number of years. And so the technology just isn't there to be able to do it right now, you know, or the data isn't there yet. So as a result, I think that it's just, you know, the conundrum has been that the technology is not there, and therefore people are live streaming, but rights holders aren't getting paid. And so there's been a friction between people wanting to be able to do whatever they want with the technology, and, you know, rights holders in the meantime not getting paid. Now, because it's a new sort of thing that people have done, there's also been a slow response from a lot of the industry to figure out how to license live streaming. You know, I just read recently that IPRS, the Indian Society, has created a rate card for live streaming if you're using music, and so, you know, we're moving on it, I think, but it's a combination of getting the technology right and then the industry moving quickly to ensure that there's some sort of pathway for people to ensure that they're doing it in a way that the music is licensed.
You mentioned a very good point about it's all well and good being registered, but it's also about how to collect, and that collector is about who holds what information. So a different record label will hold one set of information and want to keep it to themselves, and another record and another label in another country.
Yeah.
Did you get your views on whether blockchain has ever come up in your conversations, or just is that something on the radar? Is it just been and gone, or just wanted your views on that, really? To solve that problem of centralized information for everyone.
There's a few players that we know that are working on big, ambitious blockchain solutions to the music industry data problem. The music industry definitely has a data problem in that, or a data challenge, because there is no central repository of information. When people who are tech guys get into the music platform business, they're often surprised. Their biggest surprise is that there's nowhere to understand who owns what, not even from the people who own the stuff, and so there's often this thing where, okay, so like, let's say, for example, you're talking about like, I don't know, like a David Guetta song or something, right? So, if you look up the publishing splits on the average David Guetta song, there might be 3 or 4 or more writers, and so let's say you've got 4 or 5 writers. Each of them have their own publisher, so there's now 5 publishers. One person owns 2.5%, somebody else is 15%, somebody has 25%, and so on. The person who has 25% knows that they control their 25%. They don't always necessarily know who owns the rest, right? And often they do, and if you look it up on one of the Collecting Society databases, you can find who the rights holders are. But, it's not uncommon for one of those guys who owns 2.5% to have his rights held with one company in North America and a different company in Asia and a different company in the Middle East, or Africa. And so suddenly, if you ask the person in America who owns 25%, who controls the rights for this 2.5% or this other 15%, because I have a request coming in from Japan, they have no way of answering that, right? And they're incentivized to clear the rights for you because they want to monetize their 25%. But there's no what we call a global repertoire database that gives you transparency on how these rights are licensed territorially in different markets and who owns what. And then when you add to that the layer of sound recording rights as well, it's very confusing to, let's say, somebody who's starting a digital platform and just wants somebody to give them one piece of paper that tells them they're allowed to use the music that they want to use. It's a terribly complicated aspect of the business, and it's an aspect of the business that's been plagued by lack of consolidation of data. And so blockchain would, I think, help to resolve that. But in order for it to work, it would mean that every person who has data would have to submit everything that they've got to one central source, which historically nobody has done.
Giving away business info, really, your personal info. It's like handing over that information.
Yeah, I mean, you would think that it would resolve a problem. There were a few years ago, there was a movement by a couple of the major publishers and rights organizations where they spent a few $1 million raising money, deciding to put money into this one thing that they called the GRD, which is the Global Repertoire Database. And the idea was that it was going to help resolve this conundrum for digital services using music. And at some point, after a few years of, doing an initial startup phase, hiring people, building it out, spending a fair amount of money, it all sort of fell apart before it could become a teenager. Because some of the parties involved, I think, understood that there were, data is power, and there are competing interests for that power, and so it made it very difficult to get everybody to agree to play the same level playing field when they're all competing with each other. And so, it's a difficult, square to circle, as they say.
Awesome information there. What advice that you've been given would you hand down to MENA-specific artists within today's landscape that you would pass on one or two bits?
I would say that there's a default switch that we all tend to have, whereby MENA artists really would love, it's not just MENA artists, it's all artists coming from anywhere outside of the big 3 or 4 markets, you tend to always have a bit of an inferiority complex where you're always looking for validation from the US or the UK or one of the big, sort of Western markets. And my view is that that should be treated as yesterday's paradigm. This idea that we need success in those markets in order to validate true success is maybe not yet fully recognized as a antiquated idea, but it's certainly the winds of change have already begun. And this idea that we need to be validated by pop charts in the West, I think is just antiquated. I think it's an old idea. I think it made sense in a physical era, but in a digital era where we have streaming services that have entered into a lot of these historically developing economies in Asia and Africa, that within the next 10 years, China or India are going to become the biggest music markets in the world, right? In terms of revenue generated, right? That's never happened before. And these are 2 markets that actually weren't even in the top 10 for for as long as history can remember. China just hit the top 10 a few years ago because of streaming. Because it hit the top 10 as a digital market. It's not going to be another 20 years before, and the US has always been the largest music market in the world in terms of revenue generated. And that's because the US was always the most regulated market in the world. The most regulated large market in the world, right? And so, it is what it is, and it was what it was, but and that's still the case, but, population sizes are undeniable, and connectivity, there's a few things that you have to sort of remember, if you are, so I lived in the UK, I moved to the UK in the late 90s, and the first thing I noticed was how much more advanced Europe was in terms of just cellular technology when I first moved there. It just felt like, wow, you could use a phone. At that time in America and Canada, if somebody called you on your phone, you were paying for the incoming call, right? If somebody was calling you long distance, for example, right? That wasn't sort of happening in Europe. And there was just more mobility, with cell phones, and the price of cell phones were a lot cheaper and easier to use. And Europe was behind Asia at that point, the advent of the telephone, the physical telephone, wired telephone, was something that was sort of pioneered by the West. And before it ever became ubiquitous in places like Asia and Africa, they just they leapfrogged straight to cell phones, and so they just sort of went around the stage 1, 2, and 3 that we sort of went through in the West, in a lot of the Western countries. And so, you suddenly find that in Asia and Africa, people are just a little bit more, you could go into a village and they've all got like a little cell phone. That wasn't the case, in rural parts of America, when cell phones were first being introduced over there, and so you've got this sort of a cultural thing where the adoption of cellular technology and mobile phones and broadband have just moved a lot faster and leapfrogged and gone straight there. And now you introduce streaming into the equation, right? And you've got these massive populations where people are just streaming, like in India at the moment. A number of the mobile operators have basically taken the cost of data off of the table. What they basically said was, okay, if you sign up to my mobile service, you're not going to pay for data if you're using a streaming service. So whatever data you're paying for is, the cost of streaming is off the table, right? And so that's led to loads of people streaming like hell, no matter where they are, in some village somewhere in India or in China. And so you now have, billions of people, using that technology and going straight to that technology. Whereas, we had to convince people in 2010, that streaming was a thing, and it took a while for that for streaming to become a thing. The hard work was done in the West, where you had to sort of convince people to move from a download market to a streaming market. But once that sort of was done psychologically, it was then introduced into Asia and Africa, and they went 0 to 60 right away on it, and so they've got the population sizes going for them. They've got the adoption of the technology and the adoption of mobile use as not like a major hurdle to these massive populations. So they are going to grow at a faster rate in terms of subscribers to these big technology platforms than a lot of these quote unquote developed Western countries. And so, yes, the West has had a head start on a lot of this, right? And often the West is the innovators, in some cases, one could argue that Japan and China are also innovating quite a bit in terms of the use of technology as well. But they're going to move very, very fast, and the curve is going to is just going upwards in a very sharp way in a lot of these countries. And over the course of a protracted period, like 10 or 15 years, I think it's undeniable that, in 15 years from now or less, I would argue less than 10 years, China or India will become the biggest markets in terms of revenue for the music industry. And when that happens, it's not even like, it shouldn't be controversial because they've got 3 or 4 times as many people, in each country. So it's not, the odds are stacked against us in the West if
the maths.
It's just a fact, So, yes, the price point per subscriber is going to be less, but they've got so many other things going for them that I think we're going to see a ton of growth out of these markets. And as that happens, and then if you look at MENA and the Gulf, you've got very widespread mobile use, as we know, people living in Dubai or Abu Dhabi, or Qatar or Saudi, it's like everybody's got 2 phones, there's just, technology is we're moving pretty fast into a smart economy. And, I think the expectation is that we're well positioned to become very meaningful markets for the music industry. And instead of music artists focusing on how do I get the attention of somebody in America, I think over the course of the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to see that there's an opposite sort of paradigm taking shape, where people from the West are going to start looking into here and trying to figure out how do we crack, the Middle East? How do we get into India? How do we get into China and Africa? And that's going to become a lot more important to artists in the West. And what's going to let you shine as an artist in the Middle East is not going to be that you sound American. It's going to be that you sound authentically local. And local artists are going to become way more important. And so people aren't necessarily going to want an Arab artist that sounds like an American artist. They're going to want an Arab artist to sound like an Arab artist because it's the one thing that an American artist can't do. And so, you know, sort of take pride in developing your own niche and your own audience in your backyard. And I think that that's a long-term winning strategy.
I could talk all day with you, Spec. Some real golden nuggets of information there. I just wanted to, you've alluded to where Pop Arabia is moving to in the future. So I won't ask you a question for what's next. So just to wrap things up, where can people reach you if they've got any publishing or licensing interests or requests? How can they contact you?
Yeah, they can hit us up on our website, which is poparabia.com. All one word. Yeah, I mean, you can contact us through the website. There's a contact page there. Drop us a line. And or, you know, find somebody who knows us, you know, and send us some music through a trusted source is always the best way. Somebody like Toby. And, you know, we'll see where we get.
Spec, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to our next chat. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, man.
That's all for today's episode of the Matt Anna Music Show. Thank you for listening, and I hope you got a lot of valuable information from it. If you like this episode, then please make sure you subscribe to the show on iTunes, and if you can leave a review, it really helps with the growth of the podcast. Lastly, if you're a musician or music producer and want to join the region's thriving online music community and learning hub, then head over to our Lab Musica Facebook page. Until next time, take care and keep safe.